The Apocalypse of Yajnavalkya, Chapter 2, The Golden Age. The Roman poet Publius Ovidius Naso, commonly known as Ovid, grouped human history into four stages he identified as gold, silver, bronze, and iron ages. While Ovid did not know the exact dates when one age transitioned to another, he did accurately describe the conditions of each one and the events surrounding the transitions. He describes, for example, the Bronze Age as a dark time for humanity, which perfectly coincides with the aftermath of the cataclysmic event 12,800 years ago, known as the Great Flood, about which you shall read more in the future chapter. Of the Golden Age, our present consideration, Ovid says, it was a time when men lived amongst the gods and attained a notably high level of spiritual development. The environment was idyllic, perfect for growing food year-round. Ovid's work lays a foundation for understanding the history you have lost. You shall learn of these ages in chronological order, starting with the Golden Age, which commenced about 24,000 years ago, just as the sun last entered the house of Aquarius. Atlantis and the sons of God. In the ensuing 17,000 years after the supernova rained radiation down upon the Earth and spawned a new haplogroup, humanity continued to spread across the African continent and beyond. The Sahara Desert as you know it did not exist during those days. Instead, the area was a lush landscape crisscrossed by rivers and covered with tropical jungles as far as the eye could see. The larger river system made it easy for humans to travel back and forth across the African continent. I wonder if this supernova star explosion that he's talking about in this book and the radiation coming down on Earth is the same reason why the Anunnaki were seeking gold to repair their atmosphere. I wonder if this radiation was having the same, they were having the same kind of issues with their atmosphere on Nibiru from this same event, and that's why they were seeking gold. Just a thought. Let me try to pronounce this. Iberomarusians. As you now know, the earliest humans migrated from Jebel Irhoud to the east side of Africa, where the E-M215 haplogroups resulting from the supernova emerged in Ethiopia. Those humans then traveled in two directions, with some heading north into the Levant, about whom you shall learn more shortly, and some heading west back towards Jebel Irhoud and Mount Atlas, to the land that is today Mauritania. They traveled by the Tamanrasset River, a river so imposing that it had no equal today, not even the mighty Amazon with its hundreds of tributaries coursing through South America. The Tamanrasset emptied into the Atlantic, and as the great volume of water hit the ocean floor, it carved out the Cap Timiris Canyon, which is 2.5 kilometers wide and 3 kilometers deep. Among those humans who traveled along the Tamanrasset to Mauritania was an Etrurian man with the EM215 mutation. He settled with his people in an area of the south of Mount Atlas, in a region of naturally formed rings, islands within islands separated by fresh water. To ensure these geographic features were so striking, it was as if or it was as if the gods themselves had turned the whole region on a lathe. To the immediate north, a vast plain, ideal for growing all manner of food, could be found. Due to the nearness of the equator, the climate was perfect for growing food all year round. Because of the natural features of this fortuitous place, it was incredibly easy to defend their position. No intruder could invade the central island. Today, you may know this region as the Risha structure, the Eye of Africa. Signs of habitation in this area go back to the deepest reaches of humanity, with an exceptional number of Acheulean artifacts having already been recovered from this region. Rather than going on a journey into the unknown, these travelers of the Taman Rasset were returning to a place that was well known to them. The Aterian, who belonged to the EM215 haplogroup, fathered sons whose lines began at the last age of Aquarius 24,000 years ago and continue to this day. Thus, due to a large number of successful progeny, a subclade of this man's own mutation called E-Z827 emerged around this time. With this man, the Aterian lineage ended and the Ibero-Mauricians began. The first Ibero-Maurician man must have been prolific because remains of his descendants have been found in caves across the Maghreb, from modern-day Mauritania to Libya, in the Atlas Mountains, the Rif, and beyond. Members of the haplo EZ827 era, E827 are even alive and living among you today. Who was the first Ibero-Maurician, the original possessor of the EZ827 mutation? This is the crux of human history that has been lost to you, for this man was none other than Poseidon, the father of King Atlas, founder of the great city of Atlantis. It is his children who have survived from that great civilization's founding unto this day. And here you are, seeker of truth, at the beginning of the next age of Aquarius, standing on a similar precipice as the Atlanteans when they established humanity's first advanced civilization and the great city of Atlantis. In time, these people would become known as the sons of God. Plato's record. The earliest stories of humanity include Plato's Timaeus and Critias. In the latter, Critias recites a story passed down by his great-grandfather who learned it from Solon, one of the 7 sages of ancient Greece, who learned it from a priest at the Egyptian temple of Sais. Solon lived 2,600 years ago, and at the time he was told the story, it was already more than 9,000 years old. The story tells of a civilization at least 11,600 years old, the kingdom of Atlantis. Plato's Timaeus and Critias record, Plato's Timaeus and Critias record the story of Atlantis through a tale of 2 mortals, whom he calls autochthons, native humans born of the earth. These native Mauritanians named Evenor and Leucippe, or Leucippe, had a daughter named Cleito, and with whom Poseidon fell in love and had 5 sets of twins. The firstborn of the first sets of twins, Atlas, became king of the southern regions, including the capital of Atlantis, in the Risha structure. His twin brother, Gediria, ruled over the Rif and Maghreb regions of the kingdom in present-day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. As Plato writes, Atlas's brother was assigned the edge of the island which is closest to the pillars of Heracles and faces the land which is now called the territory of Gadiria, the territory of Gadiria after him. Today, this region to the south of Spain is called the Bay of Cadiz, or Cadiz. But in the time of Plato, it was called Gades. The other 8 twins were given rule over islands in the far reaches of the kingdom. In Critias, Plato says of the Atlanteans that they came from a beautiful sun-drenched island, sailing from Athens, Greece, where Plato lived beyond the pillars of Heracles, which you know today as the Strait of Gibraltar. A ship would head south along the coast of Morocco and then into the Taman Rasset, which would take them to this tropical island, the Risha structure. It is exactly the same journey made by Hanno, the navigator, and Carthaginian, about whom you will have occasion to learn more later. Through the description of history and geography, Plato makes it remarkably easy for modern man to find Atlantis, as he describes the capital city and their characteristics still visible in the Risha structure, including the rings within rings in every detail. He says, there was a plain just north of the city where the people grew their food, and there were numerous species of animals, including elephants. Through the area has since been stripped down to the bedrock by the Great Flood. To this day, there is evidence of buildings and animal pens having been present thousands of years ago, and the site meets every criterion of Plato's description of Atlantis. Plato does not say when Atlantis was founded, but he does disclose that it was destroyed 11,600 years ago, which fits with the cataclysmic event that befell the earth at the time. He also says that when Atlantis arose, humans were still hunter-gatherers with no knowledge of farming, astronomy, or sea travel. The Atlanteans developed all three and became the first true city with a government and permanent structures. The center island of the city was reserved for the priests and the king, serving as the spiritual center of the whole kingdom. The defense force, which had 1,200 ships, operated from inside the ring, while the outer ring contained the commercial area. The rings were encircled by the broader landmass, where even more people lived, and which was bustling day and night. It was a city as big as the ancient world had ever seen or would ever see, having the grandeur of Rome and likewise a population of up to 1 million. The people of Atlantis developed the ability to process and ferment food, a technique they later taught to other cultures, as you shall soon see. The discovery was not made by Mesopotamians, as some historians have mistakenly asserted, but rather Atlanteans. Today, all that remains is sand and sea debris, salt and bedrock, along with indications of where some structures sat. The remnants of this ancient first civilization having been scrubbed away, but Plato described the city and the people at length in Critias. Atlantis is not just a legend, but a place that did exist, and it changed the course of human history. African human periods. For millions of years, North Africa has experienced alternating dry and humid periods, the latter of which produced the vast river system that allows early humans to travel from northwest Africa to Ethiopia and back again. Because of these conditions, Atlantis existed in an ideal location for agriculture. And then the inhabitants became even more fortunate because the changes in the tilt of the earth, the axial precession, the area entered another humid period, also known as the balling alerod interstadial period. All of North Africa became even more lush, a true tropical paradise. Is it too far-fetched to think that this fertile Atlantis is the Garden of Eden described in the Bible? Not at all. According to one noted scholar who said this humid period created an area that can possibly be equated with the biblical paradise. The mythology of antiquity knows, for example, the Garden of Eden, Elysium, and the Golden Age. It is certainly not too daring to see a correspondence with the climate optimum of the Hellesin. Charting the heavens, sailing the world. Surely you have been taught to question the existence of the kingdom of Atlantis, though now you see that this ancient civilization is very much real. Perhaps, like many skeptics, you also believe that transoceanic voyages would have been impossible for people living at that time, that such expeditions did not happen until the Vikings or Christopher Columbus. Now it is time to put to rest lingering doubts on this front as well. Consider the career of Thor Heyerdahl, a Norwegian sailor who in the 1940s made a balsa wood raft christened the Kon-Tiki and sailed 8,000 kilometers from Peru all the way to Polynesia. 20 years later, he undertook another long voyage in a papyrus reed boat called Ra 2. This time from an old Carthaginian port on the Atlantic shores of Africa all the way across the Atlantic to Barbados. Heyerdahl's experience shows it is possible to use a primitive raft to travel long distances, making it quite likely that a civilization such as the Atlanteans had the technology to cross the oceans much earlier than the Vikings. The Homo sapiens alive in the age of Atlantis had brains just like Heyerdahl's, and they had access to papyrus. They needed only ingenuity and a daring spirit to build simple boats and sail them huge distances, beginning on the vast and lush rivers that ran through North Africa. As they looked to the sea, the Atlanteans also looked to the sky and used the stars to guide their travels. They built telescopes and installed them high up on Mount Atlas and Mount Teide, the tallest peak in the Canary Islands to this day. Teide, on the island of Tenerife, is home to over a dozen astronomical observatories. The mountain is so high up that there is very little atmospheric distortion of the light, allowing a clear look into the heavens. From this peak, the Atlanteans studied the stars and developed their observations into science and astronomy. They created the zodiac as a navigational tool and established the doctrine of the sphere. Anyone who sails by the stars today uses these techniques developed over 20,000 years ago. Do you doubt that this ancient society created this science and technology to study the stars? Search out Plato's Critias, and you shall find that he speaks of the Atlanteans' prowess on the sea and in studying the heavens. There is also evidence from more recent sources. In the first half of the last century, French researchers interviewed the Dogon people of Mali, a country adjacent to the Risha structure, and found they knew Sirius is not one but three stars orbiting each other, even though the two companion stars are not visible to the naked eye. The Dogon also knew the orbital period of these stars and that Saturn has rings and Jupiter has moons, though these details could not have been discovered without the aid of a telescope. How did the Dogon come to have such knowledge, though they lacked the technology to make these observations? Thousands of years ago, their next-door neighbors were the Atlanteans, who were not only astronomers and sailors, but also great teachers of humanity, including the Dogon people's distant ancestors who knew them as the Nomo. All the evidence lies before you, seeker of truth, revealing the history you have been denied. The great civilization of Atlantis existed, and its inhabitants were highly advanced, creating knowledge for themselves and for the generation of humans after them. Eden and the sons of Adam. As has revealed, some of the EM215 haplogroup did not travel west across Africa, but rather north into Levant. While the main literary source for the people of Atlantis is Plato, for the northern group, the main source is the book of Genesis from the Hebrew Pentateuch. Like Plato's works, the book of Genesis also describes North Africa and the Atlantean region. In one passage, the author names the 4 great rivers of the world from left to right, west to east. Genesis 2, verse 10 through 14. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads. The name of the first is Pison, that is it which compasses through, the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium and the onyx stone, and the name of the second river is Gihon. The same is it that compasses the whole land of Ethiopia. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, that is, which goeth towards the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. Havilah is what you know as North Africa. Maghreb, but because there are no rivers left in North Africa today, your teachers have thrown up their hands and said they do not know where the river Pison was. It is the Tamanrasset, the very same river that carried members of the EM215 haplogroup from Ethiopia to the land of Mount Atlas, the land that became the great capital of the city of Atlantis. The ancient Greeks used to say, one could travel the Nile south, then eventually it turned and headed west, all the way across Africa. They were referencing to the Pison, the mighty Tamanrasset. The next river, the Gihon, is now known as the Nile, which does indeed course through the whole land of Ethiopia. In some versions of the Bible, the third river, Hiddekel, is identified as the Tigris, but this is an erroneous interpretation. Genesis describes the Hiddekel as flowing towards the east of Assyria, which you know as northern Iraq, which the Tigris does not do. Instead, the Hiddekel is today known as the River Jordan, which runs through Israel and becomes the River Dan near Mount Hermon. From there, it once continued east towards Assyria through the ancient settlement of Abu Huraira, but the portion of the ancient river no longer exists. The fourth river is clearly identified as the Euphrates, a name that remains to this day. The point where the Gihon and Pison met in Ethiopia is where the new haplogroup formed after the supernova. From thence, the progenitors of King Atlas sailed west along the Tamanrasset, as had been said. The other group sailed north along the Nile, the Gihon, and into the Levant. Modern-day Jews knowledgeable of the Sefer HaYashar and the works of Josephus will tell you that this is the true Exodus spoken of in the Bible. This is the place from whence Moses led his people, not out of Egypt, but out of Ethiopia. What is the significance of the river map laid out in the book of Genesis? Read closely and you shall find the true location of Eden. It is not in the Middle East, as many suggest, nor is it in Asia or the Americas, as other scholars have proposed. No. As we have seen, Plato described the lush paradise of the lands of Atlantis, a land, nay, a garden, watered by the river Pison. This is Eden. This is Atlantis. They are one and the same. The gods. The two branches of the EM215 haplogroup came from the same ancestor affected by the supernova, but they lived very differently after they left Ethiopia. The people of the lush paradise of Atlantis formed a highly advanced agricultural civilization, while people in the more unforgiving land of Israel in the Levant were the primitive Kebarins, a hunter-gatherer society. When the two cultures interacted, their exchange became the stuff of legend. Using their sailing capabilities, the Atlanteans visited the Levant many times over thousands of years and left behind bladelets and other tools that your archaeologists have cataloged. They also amazed their Kebarin cousins with the knowledge of the stars and their ability to grow food and build structures. It has been said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, and so it was when the Atlanteans met the Kebarins. The latter decided the former must be gods, for their powers could not possibly be those of mortal men. I've talked about that so many times. All you got to do to be perceived as a god is display advanced technology to a race of primitive humans, and because they don't understand the science and the physics behind the technology, they'll call it magic and think you're a god. All right, let's continue. This dynamic has repeated itself throughout human history, where primitive human beings tend to perceive more advanced humans as gods. To this day, there are cults in the South Pacific who worship American GIs and the war material they left behind. Those are called cargo cults. Dogmatic Christians, Jews, Muslims, and Hindus like to think of themselves as more sophisticated because their gods are abstract, incorporeal entities. But that attitude is simply part of their modern-day hubris. As you'll see, there are no different than the South Pacific cargo cults in terms of the gods they worship today. Just as Polynesian tribesmen today worship a mythical American soldier named John Frum, perceived to be a god, so the Kebarins of old revered their Atlantean cousins as gods. The latter became the sons of God because they were perceived as such due to their technical superiority. When you consider the historical timing of the events of the book of Genesis, the only place a quote-unquote godlike human civilization lived at the time was Atlantis, and thus the authors of the Bible called the leader of the men who dwelt in Eden God, and the others were his angels and sons. The Atlanteans traveled to and from the Levant many times over thousands of years, observing Kebarin's progress. Then, 15,000 years ago, the Atlanteans decided to take one of the Kebarins back to Atlantis with them to reside in the royal garden as a curiosity for the Atlantean king and to see how far the savage man could be educated. The Kebarin was Adam from the book of Genesis. When the Atlanteans brought Adam to Atlantis, they did not put him in the large main agricultural garden, but a smaller place where, quote-unquote, God, King Atlas, took walks. It was Adam's task to care for the tranquil space after eating of the fruit of a tree particular medicinal value to the king. Adam was terminated from his occupation, expelled from the garden, and sent back to the Levant. The book Genesis records the interaction thus. Therefore the Lord God sent forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. Adam was not taken, not made. Adam returned to the Levant with the knowledge of how to work the land, so he taught his people how to grow and process food, and he had learned in the garden with Adam's return with Natufian culture arose, and the Kibarans disappeared. Adam was the bridge from Kibaran to Natufian, the EM78 subclade of the EM215 haplogroup that originally settled in the Levant. Those with the M78 mutation who have survived to this day are the sons of Adam, as the other Kibarans sharing this mutation soon died off without errors, or without errors. How men became giants. After Adam returned to the Levant, he found that the city of Huraira, on the banks of the ancient river Hiddekel, the city became the hub of Natufian cultures 15,000 years ago. Your scientists know the Natufians were engaged in cultivating cereals, fermenting them, and then making bread. There is evidence from the Rakafet cave in Israel that they only made bread, that they not only made bread but also beer. Everything Adam learned about fermentation and gardening, he learned from the Atlanteans, and that knowledge then spread among the Natufians. Unfortunately for the Natufians, the carbohydrate-rich but animal protein-deficient diet Adam introduced negatively affected their subsequent generations for reasons your scientists understand. One doctor, Francis M. Pottinger, studied the effects of an improper diet on the health of cats and found that those who ate primarily raw meat fared better than those who ate cooked meat, and similarly unsuitable foods, with cumulative effects from one generation to the next being seen in smaller and sicklier cats. The same is known about humans, though the effects are less pronounced. A World Health Organization publication talks about stunting, stating that stunting has been linked with the ingestion of aflatoxin, contaminated cereals, and nuts. The report also found that animal source foods are the best source of high-quality nutrients. Over successive generations of eating the cereal-rich, protein-deficient diet that Adam had learned to cultivate, the stature of the Natufians was greatly reduced. As you shall learn, by the time the Silver Age arrived, the Natufians had shrunk to the point that Iberomerizian men, just over 6 feet tall, appeared as giants. A coming war. Having considered the Golden Age, you now see clearly that Atlantis did exist as told in the stories of both Plato and the Book of Genesis, as well as the genetic and archaeological records. The Atlanteans had contact with your distant ancestors in the Levant, and your stories about human origins are actually stories of human contact with Atlanteans, because there was a relationship between the two in the deepest reaches of history. The civilization emerging in the Levant came from the influence of the Atlanteans, beginning with Adam. During the Golden Age, the Atlanteans in Africa and the Natufians in the Levant had an emerging peaceful coexistence, both amongst themselves and with each other. This peace was interrupted by the events that brought about the Silver Age, the battle between Atlas and Cronus, the war in heaven. Okay, that's the end of chapter 2. We'll continue chapter 3 in another upload.